The night before last, Dennis's hysterical weeping woke me up for the 10th time in as many days. The high, miserable Keen leached through our shared wall like mold. I got up and tiptoed to his door. "I can't do this," he hiccuped. "I'll die. I'm going to die, and so will you." My skin prickled, every tiny hair lifting, and as far as I could tell, uprooting and crawling to new follicles. A heavy hand fell on my shoulder and spun me around. My father. He quickly signed, "Tell him to shut the fuck up." I swallowed hard. "Dennis? What's wrong?" "Nothing." His voice was thick with tears. "Tell him to shut up." "Dad wants me to tell you." My father lost patience, slammed his fist into the door, conveying his message with perfect clarity. Then he stalked away. I retreated to my room and slept badly. Around dawn, I heard Dennis's door creak open. He made a miserable noise. Michael's voice followed, an unintelligible hiss that almost pulled me from my twilight state. Instead, I turned over and fell asleep. I woke to the sound of screaming. I tumbled out of bed, feet hitting cold bamboo floorboards as Dennis's door slammed. Worst case scenarios whirled through my head. Raids, retaliation, even executions. By the time I made it to the hall, Dennis's screaming hit a fever pitch. To my horror, our father joined in. Worst of all, I couldn't hear Michael. Michael, who for all his faults, would die for any of us. I almost ran, but quickly came to my senses. If this was the worst case scenario, I was dead anyway. Better to die with my family than end up kidnapped or in jail. I opened Dennis's door. Several small ivory-colored objects skittered across the floor, sludging to a halt in a pool of blood. Teeth. They were teeth. Dennis and my father clung to each other, screaming. I scanned Dennis's bedroom with a mounting horror. In a patch of sunlight sat an entire bottom jaw. Ropey sinews of flesh and muscle folded over the lolling tongue. A skullcap lay mirrored a few feet away. Hair clung to it, long and dark, just like Michael's. Sure enough, his body lay nearby, torn, hopelessly broken. Splintered bones, scraps of flesh, muscle, and clothing were all bogged in a swamp of blood. Wet twists of gristle covered everything like cannibal confetti. In the midst of it all stood a woman. She was streaked with gore. Viscera transformed her hair into ropey tangles, sublimating in a morass of indecent wetness. Blood and tissue clung to her face, but somehow her beauty eclipsed the carnage. She possessed a breathtaking loveliness that superseded every preference I thought I had. The fact that she wore a full-skirted ball gown added to her undeniable presence. Dad and Dennis continued to scream. "Excuse me." The woman's voice was sweet and girlish, verging on hiccupy and annoying as hell. "Will you shut them up?" What did you do?" One of Michael's eyes hung from the ceiling fan, dangling by the optic nerve. It reminded me of a ping-pong paddle. "I got born." The absurdity almost broke me. Born? She'd just been born? Michael's exploded body suddenly made sense. Physically, Michael was a giant, and this woman was small, but no human being, not even a giant, is capable of birthing a grown adult. I swallowed hard against my rising gorge. Women give birth. "Women," she countered, "give birth to infants." You're not an infant." "That's why I chose a man. Clearly, it was a mistake. I apologize." "Who are you?" "Your brother's fairy godmother." She delicately towed the mangled remains of Michael's hips. His legs, the only intact part of him, rolled bonelessly. I took Dennis's hand and pulled him toward the door. Our father reached for him helplessly. "Give us a second," I said. "Please." "Of course." We went to my room. I looked at him helplessly as anger and confusion fought with overwhelming pity. Wheat-colored hair framed his soft face. He looked young, delicate, beautiful, and fragile, just like his mind. "Who is she?" I whispered. I've always heard voices." "What does that have to do with anything?" I've always heard voices, he repeated stubbornly, but last year, I heard only one. Hers. Dennis. Just listen. She said she was my fairy godmother. I thought it was just another hallucination, but she started telling me things. His face twisted. Started showing me things. Like what? Like the void. His paintings immediately filled my mind's eye, those eerie straits of shimmering darkness. And she showed me how to make paintings real. I followed her instructions and made a painting that turned into a window. I could put my hand through it, into the void. It was real. That's when I knew she wasn't a hallucination. Show me. He went into his bedroom, where the fairy godmother was trying to control Dad.
Let me make a peace offering. You'll like it. You'll love it. You just have to let me touch you.
Dennis came back, carrying his massive portfolio. He riffled through it, then extracted a roll of unstretched canvas and spread it on the floor. Yet another painting of the void. Looking at it gave me chills. It had an unsettling depth of field and too much detail. The dim colors seemed to pulse. This is where she came from. The void between dimensions. Dennis wiped his eyes quickly. She told me how to make a portal. I made so many. It's hard. She was moving so fast, it's almost impossible, but yesterday, I finally made one in time to catch her. She grabbed my arm. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a hideous mass of bruising and raw welts. I grabbed hers. I got a scrap of her skin. She told me to feed it to someone I hate, and that way she'd come to me. This is insane. I stood up, ignoring the painful, nauseous lurch in my chest. You're insane. Alex, please. I stalked back into his room, just as my father asked, "What are you doing here?" At the sound of his voice, my heart stopped. My father's tongue got cut out when Dennis was 3. The details aren't important, but they took it at the root and ruined his face while they were at it. He hasn't spoken a word in 15 years. Excuse me? What? He repeated in a tone that made my hair stand on end. Are you doing here?
I came to help Dennis,
she answered.
Since none of you will.
Help him with what?
That's up to him. Now let's give this body a proper burial. If we don't, he may come back and I don't want to deal with that this time around.
I obediently dug a secret grave in the trash woods on our property and single-handedly buried Michael while my brother's fairy godmother looked on. When I finished, she said,
Your father received a peace offering. So should you. What do you want?
You? I thought, but of course I couldn't say it. Doesn't it make you weak, giving up your power? She smirked. Her eyes glimmered like dusty emeralds.
If you dig around in your ass and wipe your finger on your father, does that deplete your energy? Because that's all it is. You're not taking anything from me. I'm actually insulting you.
Then tell me the truth. What are you, really?
A god,
she said,
that left her throne and crossed eternity to help your brother.
Why?
Because he needs it. Because I need him.
She let go of me and stepped back.
Because no one needs people like your father, or you.
And with that, she skipped off, gore-drenched dress rustling in the grass. She insisted on cooking dinner. Unsurprisingly, it was tense.
Dennis wants to contact the police,
she said.
I'm going to help him.
Dad's eyes glittered. Will you now?
Of course.
My father smiled, then lunged across the table. Before I knew it, he'd cut her throat with a steak knife. Dennis wailed. His fairy godmother frowned, then shot my father a murderous look.
Try again. Run me over. Shoot me to pieces. Set me on fire. It won't matter.
She stabbed her chicken viciously as blood cascaded down her chest.
Dennis, my anchor. No one can hurt me as long as I'm with him.
She smirked.
But by all means, try again. I love playing with my food.
My father left the table. I'm a good son and a terrible brother, so I followed.
Didn't you know?
The woman called after us.
I have to eat you both. There's no way around it.
My father took me outside. We have to kill her. How? He rubbed his mouth and anxiously began to pace. Dennis. He won't hurt her. No. We kill him. Tonight. For a terrible instant, I thought I was going to cry. We can't. He's sick, and he brought that that thing here. And he's going to... He broke off and took a deep breath. He's useless, he's worthless, he's dangerous, and he's weak. My father was right. He always is. I asked to kill Dennis because I wanted to make it painless. Dad refused, saying, I made him, I'll undo him. I went to my room and cried for hours. Long after nightfall, my father burst in, wild-eyed and panicked. Did you tell him? Did you tell him to get away? What do you mean? He isn't here! My father shrieked. They're gone! My heart dropped to my stomach. If Dennis left, he'd go into the police. That meant we were done for. We searched the house and found nothing. Then we went outside, splitting up to canvass the property quickly. To my immense shock, I found him by Michael's grave. Dennis sat, head buried in his hands, as his fairy godmother soothed him. Dennis? What are you doing? Hiding from you! He looked up, revealing a blotchy, tear-stained face. You want to kill me! Wind moaned, bending the grass and fluttering my hair. I'm sorry. No, you're not. You never were. He stood up unsteadily. You're just like Dad. You think you're... I heard a muffled whistle. A second later, the side of Dennis's head evaporated and he crumbled to the ground. Dad emerged from the woods, gun trained on the fairy godmother. Good effort. His teeth glinted in the moonlight, but this is over. The fairy godmother's head suddenly expanded, growing 2, 3, 10 times its size. A massive mouth rippled into being, growing into an enormous black pit. Before he could react, she swallowed him. Then she tottered to Dennis's corpse and regurgitated blood and viscera, yes, but more. Torrents of darkness, dim stars, and streaks of light all pouring over him like a flood. Finally, she stopped, reverting to normal proportions as Dennis sat up, whole and unharmed. I realized I was crying. At that moment, blinding light erupted around us. A bones-shaking roar exploded as an enormous machine descended from the sky. Strange figures glimmered into being, tall and thin, not quite humanoid. The fairy godmother began to laugh, high and gobbling, utterly inhuman. One of the figures approached me. Calmness settled over me as it spoke in a strange, alien timbre. Apology has escaped. Bad prisoner, uncooperative, like to fraternize with sad apes. Cause many problems for a sad ape like you. Sorry, under control now. It pulled away. The calmness went with it, leaving me cold, confused, and terrified. The creature went to Dennis, who began to cry. Then with another blinding flash and a deafening mechanical roar, everything, the creatures, the fairy godmother, and the machine, all disappeared. Dennis ran to the house. I stayed by Michael's grave until dawn. I finally checked Dennis's room a few hours ago. He's gone. Fresh black paint covers his walls, leavened only by the faintest hints of color. 3 of the walls are solid, 1 isn't. It opens to a void, an endless and dark, glimmering with distant lights. I threw things into it, books, paper, pencils, brushes. They all hurtled through and were quickly swallowed by darkness. Dennis painted one last portal for his fairy godmother. I'll never know if he fell accidentally or if he jumped. Either way, I hope he finds her.